I need to tell you something that I probably shouldn't be telling you, but I'm going to anyway." These were the words that echoed through a television studio as King Charles sat before cameras, his face drawn with an exhaustion that went far beyond physical fatigue. For decades, the British royal family has operated behind a carefully constructed veil of tradition and protocol, their private struggles hidden beneath crowns and ceremony. But on one extraordinary evening, that veil didn't just slip, it was deliberately torn away. What did King Charles really want the world to know? And why did Queen Camilla choose this precise moment to extend an olive branch to the one person the royal establishment had worked so hard to keep at arm's length? Join us as we uncover the shocking truth behind the king's unprecedented television appearance and the dramatic reconciliation that no one saw coming. It all began quietly on a Thursday afternoon in late November 2024 when Buckingham Palace released a statement so brief it could fit in a single tweet. "His Majesty the King will address the nation this evening at 8 p.m. No context, no explanation, just 12 words that sent the British media into a frenzy of speculation. Royal correspondents scrambled to their sources. News anchors cleared their evening schedules, and millions of Britons marked their calendars, sensing that something significant, perhaps even historic, was about to unfold. The broadcast itself was unlike anything the monarchy had produced in modern memory. There were no gilded frames, no ancestral portraits gazing down from ancient walls, no carefully arranged flowers symbolizing continuity and tradition. Instead, King Charles sat in a simple chair in what appeared to be a private study at Clarence House, wearing an ordinary navy suit with no medals, no regalia, no visual reminders of his position. The lighting was soft, almost intimate, and when he began to speak, his voice carried a weight that immediately silenced even the most cynical critics. "I'm speaking to you tonight not as your king, but as someone who has learned that the crown, for all its grandeur, cannot shield us from the most fundamental human experiences," he said, his hands folded in his lap, his eyes fixed directly on the camera. "6 months ago, I received a diagnosis that I had hoped would remain private. But I've come to realize that privacy in some circumstances is a luxury that does more harm than good." The revelation sent shockwaves across the United Kingdom and beyond. Cancer. The king had cancer. He didn't specify what type, didn't delve into medical details, but the admission itself was unprecedented. British monarchs simply didn't discuss their health publicly unless absolutely necessary. Queen Elizabeth II had maintained such strict privacy about her physical condition that even her closest advisors were often kept in the dark. King George VI's lung cancer had been shrouded in euphemisms and carefully worded bulletins until his death. But here was Charles laying bare his vulnerability to an audience of millions. The treatment has been difficult," he continued, and viewers could see the evidence in the slight tremor of his hands, the careful way he shifted his weight as though sitting had become uncomfortable. "There have been days when I've questioned whether I have the strength to continue, whether I'm the leader you need me to be. But in those darkest moments, I've been reminded of something my mother once told me when I was very young. She said, 'Charles, the crown is not a shield, it's a responsibility. And the greatest responsibility we have is to be truthful, especially when the truth is hard.'" But the king's health was only the first shock of the evening. What came next would dominate headlines for weeks and fundamentally alter the dynamics of the royal family in ways that royal watchers are still attempting to decode. After discussing his treatment, carefully avoiding specifics that might violate medical privacy, Charles shifted in his chair and something in his demeanor changed. The vulnerability remained, but it was now accompanied by a steely resolve. "I want to address something that I know has caused pain not just within my family, but among many of you who have followed our story," he said. "The rift between my son Harry, his wife Meghan, and the institution has been well documented, too well documented perhaps. But what hasn't been adequately discussed is my own role in that rift, the ways in which the protocols and traditions I spent my entire life upholding became walls instead of bridges. To truly understand the magnitude of what happened next, we need to step back to March 19, 2020, when the world watched Prince Harry and Meghan Markle board a flight to Los Angeles, leaving behind their roles as senior working royals. The departure, which British tabloids quickly dubbed Megxit, was portrayed as abandonment betrayal, a selfish choice that prioritized personal happiness over duty. But those close to the couple told a different story, one of institutional racism, relentless media harassment, and a family structure so rigid that it couldn't accommodate a biracial American actress, no matter how hard she tried to conform. The tensions had been building for years, visible to anyone paying attention. There was the wedding on May 19, 2018, a glorious spectacle at St. George's Chapel that seemed to herald a new, more inclusive era for the monarchy. Meghan walked part of the aisle alone after her father's absence, a powerful image of independence that thrilled some viewers and unsettled others. The ceremony blended traditional Anglican hymns with a rousing sermon by Bishop Michael Curry about the revolutionary power of love. It felt in that moment like the royal family was finally ready to evolve. But behind the scenes, the reality was far more complicated. According to Valentine Lowe, royal correspondent for The Times and author of Courtiers: The Hidden Power Behind the Crown, the clash began almost immediately. The royal household operates on a system that's been refined over centuries. Lowe explained in an interview shortly after the Sussexes' departure. It's not designed to accommodate people who want to do things differently, even when those different approaches might be more effective. Meghan came in with ideas about engagement, about using their platform for social justice, and she ran headfirst into a brick wall of, "That's not how we do things here." Prince William's former press secretary, Jamie Lowther Pinkerton, was more diplomatic, but equally revealing in his assessment. "The institution is like a giant ship," he said. "It doesn't turn quickly, and when you have someone trying to turn it at speed, there's going to be friction. That friction isn't necessarily anyone's fault. It's just the reality of trying to modernize something that sees its traditional approach as its greatest strength." For Meghan, the friction wasn't merely bureaucratic, it was deeply personal. The British tabloid media, notorious for its aggressive tactics, seemed to take particular pleasure in tearing her down. Headlines compared her unfavorably to Kate Middleton in ways that many observers found racially tinged. When Kate held her baby bump, it was tender and maternal. When Meghan did the same, it was vulgar and attention-seeking. When Kate ate avocados, it was healthy. When Meghan did, she was supporting deforestation and drought. The double standard was so blatant that it became impossible to ignore. Harry watched his wife endure the same treatment that had hounded his mother, Princess Diana, and something inside him broke. Friends who knew him during this period describe a man torn between loyalty to his family and love for his wife, increasingly convinced that he couldn't protect both. In their explosive interview with Oprah Winfrey, which aired on March 7, 2021, Harry revealed the depth of his anguish. "I was trapped, but I didn't know I was trapped," he said, his voice thick with emotion. "My father and my brother, they are trapped. They don't get to leave, and I have compassion for that." The interview dropped multiple bombshells, allegations of racism within the royal family, claims that Meghan had been denied help when she felt suicidal assertions that Charles had cut off Harry financially. But perhaps the most devastating moment came when Meghan described feeling completely alone. "I just didn't want to be alive anymore," she told Oprah, Harry gripping her hand. "And that was a very clear and real and frightening constant thought. And I remember how he just cradled me." The royal family's response was brief and pointed. "The whole family is saddened to learn the full extent of how challenging the last few years have been for Harry and Meghan. The issues raised, particularly that of race, are concerning. While some recollections may vary, they are taken very seriously and will be addressed by the family privately. Some recollections may vary. 5 words that would become infamous, suggesting that Harry and Meghan were either mistaken or lying. The divide seemed insurmountable. Harry and Meghan built a new life in California, signing deals with Netflix and Spotify, launching their Archwell Foundation while back in Britain. William and Kate assumed more responsibilities, and Charles prepared for his eventual reign. The two camps existed in parallel universes, communicating, if at all, through lawyers and carefully worded public statements. But then came King Charles's diagnosis in early 2024. The exact date remains private, but palace insiders suggest it was sometime in February, discovered during a routine procedure for an enlarged prostate. Charles, who had spent decades promoting organic farming, holistic health, and environmental causes, suddenly found himself confronting his own mortality in the most clinical, modern way possible through oncologists' treatment plans and the sterile reality of hospital wards. According to Robert Hardman, author of Charles III, New King, New Court, The Inside Story, the diagnosis forced a reckoning. Charles had always been someone who thought long-term, Hardman wrote. His environmental work was about preserving the planet for future generations. His architectural initiatives were about creating buildings that would still be beautiful in 200 years. But cancer has a way of making you focus on the present. And in the present, his relationship with his younger son was broken possibly beyond repair. The king's first instinct, according to sources close to the palace, was to reach out privately. He wrote to Harry an actual handwritten letter, not an email or text, in late March 2024. The contents remain confidential, but those who have spoken to both men suggest it was deeply personal. Charles apparently wrote about regret, about the ways in which his own complicated relationship with his parents had perhaps made him a less emotionally available father than he wished to be. He wrote about Diana, about how her death had frozen all of them in time, unable to process their grief in healthy ways. And he wrote about wanting to know his grandchildren, Archie and Lilibet, before time ran out. Harry's response was cautious, but not cold. He flew to London in early May, meeting his father at Clarence House for a conversation that lasted nearly 3 hours. No aides were present. No one took notes. It was simply a father and son trying to find their way back to each other across a chasm of hurt and misunderstanding. They didn't resolve everything, how could they? But they established a fragile connection, a willingness to try. Yet, even as Charles and Harry worked toward reconciliation, another relationship remained frozen, the one between Meghan and the rest of the royal family. Meghan had not returned to Britain since Queen Elizabeth's funeral in September 2022. She was, by most accounts, still hurt and angry, convinced that the institution had not only failed to protect her, but had actively participated in her vilification. Kate had reportedly tried to build bridges in the years since the departure, sending Christmas gifts to Archie and Lilibet, but the gestures felt tentative, inadequate to the scale of the damage. Queen Camilla's role in all of this had been carefully managed. She had spent years overcoming her own public relations nightmare, gradually transforming from the other woman who contributed to Charles and Diana's divorce into a respected consort who supported her husband and championed causes like domestic violence prevention and literacy. She understood perhaps better than anyone in the family what it meant to be an outsider facing public hostility. And she had watched Meghan endure similar treatment with a recognition that clearly troubled her. In late October 2024, Camilla did something unprecedented. She invited Meghan to a private lunch at her personal retreat in the Cotswolds, not as a formal royal engagement, but as one woman to another. The invitation was extended through a personal note, not official channels, and it emphasized that this would be entirely off the record. No press, no palace staff, just the two of them talking honestly about their experiences. Meghan accepted. She flew to London on November 8th, staying at a private residence rather than any royal property, and drove herself to the Cotswolds on a gray Friday morning. What transpired during that lunch remains largely private. Both women agreed that some conversations are too important to be conducted in public, but snippets have emerged through trusted intermediaries. Camilla apparently began by acknowledging the obvious, "I know what it's like to be hated," she said, according to someone Meghan later confided in. I know what it's like to have the press decide you're a villain and then spend years trying to prove them right. And I know how isolating it feels when the institution you're supposed to be part of seems more interested in protecting its image than protecting you. They talked about Diana, a conversation that could have been awkward but was reportedly cathartic for both women. Camilla expressed genuine remorse for the pain her relationship with Charles had caused, while Meghan spoke about the impossible burden of being compared to Diana, constantly held up as either her successor or her betrayer, never allowed to simply be herself. They discussed motherhood, the peculiar challenge of raising children in the public eye, the fear that your own trauma might somehow be passed down to the next generation. And they talked about what reconciliation might actually look like. Not a fairy tale ending where everyone pretends the past didn't happen, but a realistic path forward that acknowledges the harm done while creating space for healing. "I can't undo what happened to you," Camilla reportedly said, "but I can promise that I will use whatever influence I have to make sure the same mistakes aren't repeated." The lunch lasted 4 hours, far longer than initially planned. When Meghan left, she was photographed briefly by a passing driver, images that were quickly sold to the media, but showed only a woman in sunglasses getting into a car. The photos sparked speculation, but no concrete information. And for a few weeks, nothing seemed to change publicly. Harry continued his occasional visits to see his father. William and Kate maintained their busy schedule of engagements. The press moved on to other stories. But behind the scenes, Camilla was working. She spoke to Charles about the conversation, emphasizing Meghan's willingness to find a way forward if the family was willing to meet her halfway. She had carefully informal conversations with William and Kate, not demanding anything, but gently pointing out that holding grudges was exhausting and ultimately pointless. "Life's too short," she reportedly told William. "Trust me, I spent years being defined by my worst mistake, and it nearly destroyed me. Don't let that happen to your family." William, who had been perhaps the most resistant to reconciliation, slowly began to soften. His wife's influence helped. Kate had always maintained that family feuds benefited no one, especially not the children who would grow up knowing they had cousins they'd never met. In late November, William did something that shocked even his closest aides. He sent a text message to Harry. Not a formal letter, not a statement through intermediaries, but a simple text that said, "We should talk, really talk. Not just about the past, but about what we want for our kids." And that brings us back to King Charles's television appearance, which now takes on even greater significance. The broadcast wasn't just about announcing his illness or discussing his mortality. It was the first step in a carefully orchestrated effort to publicly acknowledge that the royal family had made mistakes, that protocols and traditions, however well-intentioned, had caused genuine harm, and that change was not only possible but necessary. "I cannot undo the past," Charles said during the broadcast, his voice steady despite the emotion clearly visible in his eyes. "I cannot erase the pain that my son and daughter-in-law experienced, or the role that my institution played in that pain. But I can tell you with absolute sincerity that I am profoundly sorry, and I can promise that we are committed to doing better." The words landed with seismic force. A British monarch publicly apologizing to family members who had criticized the institution, acknowledging fault without qualification or hedging. It was unprecedented. Royal historian Dr. Anna Whitelock called it perhaps the most significant break with tradition since Edward VIII's abdication speech. But Charles wasn't finished. "I'm grateful to my wife, Queen Camilla, who has shown me that strength and humility are not opposites but partners," he continued. "She reminded me that the crown may symbolize authority, but true authority comes from admitting when you're wrong and working to make things right. And so with her encouragement and support, I want to announce that we have invited Prince Harry, Meghan, and their children to join us for Christmas at Sandringham." The camera lingered on Charles's face as he said this, capturing the mixture of hope and vulnerability that made him in that moment seem less like a monarch and more like a father who desperately wanted his fractured family to heal. "I don't know if they'll accept," he admitted. "That's their decision to make, and whatever they choose, I will respect it. But I want them to know that they are welcome. Not as former royals returning to duty, but as family members who are loved and missed." The response to the broadcast was swift and divided. Traditionalists argued that Charles was weakening the monarchy by making it too personal, too emotional, too vulnerable. "The strength of the crown has always been its distance," complained one conservative commentator. "By reducing himself to just another father with family drama, Charles undermines the very institution he's meant to represent." But others saw it differently. Polls conducted in the days following the broadcast showed that 68% of Britons viewed Charles more favorably after his candid discussion of his illness and family struggles. Younger respondents, particularly those under 40, were overwhelmingly positive. "He seems human," one 28-year-old told surveyors. "Like maybe the royals are finally joining the 21st century." The international reaction was even more supportive. American media, which had largely backed Harry and Meghan's narrative, praised Charles's willingness to acknowledge wrongdoing. Canadian and Australian commentators noted that this kind of public accountability might help modernize the monarchy in ways that could strengthen rather than weaken Commonwealth ties. Even traditionally Republican voices in Ireland and Scotland grudgingly admitted that Charles's approach represented a meaningful evolution. As for Harry and Meghan themselves, they released a statement 2 days after the broadcast. "We are deeply moved by His Majesty's words and by the private conversations we have had with various family members in recent months. Reconciliation is a process, not a moment, and there is still work to be done by all parties. But we are cautiously optimistic that a path forward exists, one that honors both our need to protect our family and our love for the relatives we've been estranged from. We will be spending Christmas in the United Kingdom and look forward to our children finally meeting their grandfather, uncle, aunt, and cousins in a truly meaningful way." The announcement dominated news cycles for days. Royal correspondents analyzed every word, looking for hidden meanings or reservations. But the basic facts were clear. After years of bitter division, the royal family was taking genuine steps toward reconciliation. And at the center of it all were two women, Camilla and Meghan, who understood better than most what it meant to be both insider and outsider, to be blamed for problems they didn't create and expected to fix situations they didn't cause. Christmas at Sandringham 2024 was unlike any holiday gathering the royal family had experienced in living memory. The atmosphere was tentative, careful, with everyone acutely aware that they were trying to rebuild trust that had been shattered. Harry and Meghan arrived on December 23rd with 5-year-old Archie and 3-year-old Lilibet, who had never spent time with their British relatives in any meaningful capacity. The initial greeting was captured only in carefully released photographs, Charles embracing his grandchildren, William and Harry shaking hands with genuine warmth, Kate and Meghan talking while watching the children play. But those who witnessed the reunion describe it as deeply emotional. Charles reportedly spent nearly an hour just sitting with Archie and Lilibet, reading them stories and showing them around the estate. William and Harry went for a long walk on the grounds, their first private conversation in over 2 years. Kate and Meghan had tea in the sitting room, their discussion ranging from motherhood to mental health to the absurdity of royal protocol. Camilla, for her part, worked quietly to ensure everyone felt comfortable. She arranged for Meghan to have space when the formality became overwhelming. She gently redirected conversations when old tensions threatened to resurface. She made sure the children's needs were prioritized over adult schedules. In short, she did what she had done at that October lunch. She created a space where healing could happen, even if slowly and imperfectly. The Christmas dinner itself was a smaller affair than usual, just immediate family, rather than the extended gathering of cousins, aunts, and uncles that typically filled Sandringham. Charles gave a short toast before the meal, his voice thick with emotion. "I have spent my life preparing to be king," he said, looking around the table at his sons, their wives, his grandchildren, and the woman who had stood by him through decades of scrutiny and criticism. But no amount of preparation could have taught me what I've learned this year, that crowns and titles mean nothing compared to the people we love and the time we have with them. I'm grateful beyond words that we're all here together. Even in absence, Diana's presence was felt. Harry spoke about his mother during the dinner, sharing a memory of her sneaking him and William extra desserts when their nanny wasn't looking. William added his own recollection of Diana doing terrible impersonations of stuffy palace officials, making her sons laugh until they couldn't breathe. And Charles, who had spent decades unable to discuss his first wife publicly without awkwardness, surprised everyone by raising his glass and saying, "To Diana, who loved fiercely and taught our sons to do the same." The moment was cathartic in ways that years of therapy and mediation had not been. By acknowledging Diana not as a saint, not as a victim, but as a flawed, loving human being who had left an indelible mark on all of them, they created space to move forward. Not to forget the past, but to carry it differently with less bitterness and more grace. Of course not everything was perfect. There were awkward silences and conversations that veered too close to old wounds. Harry and William had a tense exchange about media strategy that had to be diffused by Kate. Meghan still struggled with certain aspects of royal protocol that felt outdated and unnecessary. And Charles's health remained a shadow over the proceedings, a reminder that time was precious and finite. But when the family attended Christmas Day services at St. Mary Magdalene Church, the image of them walking together, Charles and Camilla in front, followed by William and Kate with their children, and then Harry and Meghan with Archie and Lilibet, sent a powerful message. Whatever their private disagreements, whatever complicated history they carried, they were choosing to move forward as a family. The king's health, while still a concern, has apparently stabilized. His medical team remains cautiously optimistic about his treatment, though they emphasize that cancer is unpredictable and guarantees are impossible. Charles has scaled back his public duties, appearing only for events he deems truly essential. But he has also become more visible in one specific way. He regularly posts photographs of himself with his grandchildren on the official royal social media accounts, images that show him building snowmen, with Charlotte reading to Louis, playing tag with Archie and Lilibet. These images serve multiple purposes. They humanize the monarchy in ways that traditional formal portraits never could. They demonstrate that the royal family is evolving, becoming more transparent and relatable. And they show that reconciliation, while difficult and ongoing, is possible when people prioritize love over pride and connection over protocol. Queen Camilla's role in all of this has not gone unnoticed. Public approval of the Queen Consort has reached unprecedented levels, with recent polling showing that 73% of Britons view her favorably, a stunning reversal from the deep unpopularity she faced in the years following Diana's death. Royal commentators credit her authenticity, her willingness to acknowledge difficult truths, and her clear commitment to supporting both her husband and the broader family. Camilla understood something that the institution had forgotten, explained Penny Junor, one of the most respected royal biographers. She understood that the monarchy's survival depends not on maintaining a perfect image, but on demonstrating that even privileged people face human struggles and can grow from their mistakes. By reaching out to Meghan, by encouraging Charles to prioritize family over protocol, she helped save not just the relationships, but potentially the relevance of the crown itself. The reconciliation has also had practical implications for the monarchy's future. With Harry and Meghan willing to occasionally attend family events and support certain royal initiatives, the burden on William and Kate has lessened slightly. The brothers have begun discussing how they might collaborate on charitable work, particularly in areas like mental health and veteran support where their interests align. There's no talk of Harry returning to full-time royal duties. Both sides agree that ship has sailed, but the possibility of cooperation rather than competition has opened doors that seemed permanently closed. For Meghan, the shift has been personally transformative in unexpected ways. She recently gave an interview to British Vogue, her first major UK media appearance since leaving, in which she spoke candidly about the past years. "I don't regret protecting my family," she said. I don't regret leaving when staying would have destroyed my mental health. But I'm grateful that we've reached a point where I can have a relationship with people I genuinely care about without compromising my well-being or my values. That's not something I expected to be possible. When asked specifically about Camilla, Meghan was thoughtful. She didn't have to reach out. Meghan acknowledged. She could have stayed silent, protected herself, avoided any potential backlash from the traditionalists who think royals should never admit fault or show vulnerability. But she chose courage over comfort, and that meant everything to me. She showed me that there were people in that family who understood what I'd experienced because they'd experienced their own versions of it. The interview sparked intense interest, with clips going viral across social media platforms. But notably, the reaction was far more nuanced than it would have been even a year earlier. Rather than the usual division between Team Sussex and Team Cambridge, many commentators praised the maturity all parties had shown. "This is what real families look like," wrote one popular British columnist. "Messy, complicated, sometimes painful, but ultimately capable of growth and forgiveness when people choose love over ego." Prince William's evolution has perhaps been the most subtle but significant. Known for his protective instincts toward his family and his deep resentment of the media intrusion that contributed to his mother's death, William had initially viewed Harry and Meghan's public complaints as betrayal. How could they criticize the institution while benefiting from its privileges? How could Harry, who knew better than anyone what media attention could do, court that very attention through interviews and documentaries? But the conversation William had with Camilla, followed by his father's diagnosis, apparently shifted something fundamental in his perspective. William began to recognize that his own experience of the institution as the heir, the future king, the one who would always be protected and prioritized, was fundamentally different from Harry's experience as the spare, the backup, the one whose needs were always secondary. And he started to see how Meghan's experience as an outsider, trying to navigate a system designed to preserve the status quo, might have genuinely been as difficult as she claimed. Kate's influence on William's changing perspective cannot be overstated. According to sources close to the couple, Kate repeatedly reminded her husband that their children would grow up with cousins they'd never know unless the family found a way to bridge their divisions. She pointed out that Charlotte and Louis were also spares in their own way, and that how the family treated Harry might set a precedent for how her own children would be treated in the future. The argument resonated. When William finally had that long walk with Harry during the Christmas gathering, he apparently began by apologizing. "I should have protected you better," he said, according to someone Harry later confided in. "When you needed me to stand up for you and Meghan, I chose the institution over my brother. I told myself it was about duty and responsibility, but really, I was just scared. Scared of making waves, scared of being seen as disloyal, scared of ending up like the uncles whose scandals nearly brought down the monarchy." Harry's response was equally honest. "I needed you," he admitted. "But I also needed to save my wife and protect my kids. And I'm sorry that I couldn't find a way to do that without burning everything down. I'm sorry for the pain my public statements caused you and Catherine. I was so focused on my own hurt that I didn't fully consider yours." It wasn't a perfect resolution. Both brothers acknowledged that rebuilding trust would take time and consistent effort. But it was a start. And sometimes a start is all you need to imagine a different future. As 2025 unfolds, the royal family faces unprecedented challenges. Charles's health remains uncertain. The monarchy's role in British society continues to be debated, with younger generations questioning whether a hereditary institution has any place in modern democracy, and the family itself still bears the scars of years of public conflict and private pain. But they also have something they lacked a year ago: hope. Hope that honest conversation can heal even the deepest wounds. Hope that traditions can evolve without losing their meaning. Hope that a family torn apart by duty protocol and misunderstanding can find its way back to love. Charles captured this sentiment in a speech he gave at his 76th birthday celebration on November 14, 2024, just days after the shocking television broadcast. "I have been heir to the throne for longer than any person in British history," he said, his voice carrying across the assembled guests. 7 decades of waiting, preparing, watching my mother serve with a grace I can only aspire to match. And in all that time I thought I understood what it meant to be king. But I was wrong. He paused, letting the words sink in. Being king is not about wearing a crown or living in a palace or being addressed with elaborate titles. It's about service, yes, but service begins at home. It begins with the people you love, with acknowledging when you've failed them, with doing the hard work of repair, even when it would be easier to maintain a dignified distance. My mother taught me duty, but my sons, my wife, my grandchildren, they've taught me something equally important. They've taught me that duty without love is just ritual, and ritual without meaning is just theater. The speech received a standing ovation, with several attendees visibly moved to tears. But its real impact came in the conversations it sparked across the United Kingdom and Commonwealth. People began discussing their own family estrangements, their own struggles to balance tradition with authenticity, their own journeys toward forgiveness and reconciliation. The king's candor had given them permission to be equally candid about their own imperfect lives. Even in absence, the ghost of Diana hovers over all of this, not as a reproach, but as an inspiration. Diana, who had bucked protocol to hug AIDS patients and walk through minefields. Diana, who had told her sons that their most important job was to be kind. Diana, who had struggled within the constraints of royal life, but never stopped insisting that compassion mattered more than ceremony. Her voice lived on in Harry's determination to protect his family at all costs, in William's growing recognition that love shouldn't require sacrifice of self, and in Charles's late-in-life understanding that vulnerability is strength, not weakness. As this story continues to unfold, and it will continue because families are never finished, always evolving, one thing has become clear: the British monarchy's survival may ultimately depend not on maintaining the image of perfection, but on demonstrating the very human capacity for growth, forgiveness, and change. The next chapter remains unwritten. Will Harry and Meghan attend more family events, or will Christmas 2024 prove to be an exception rather than a new beginning? Will Charles's health improve, giving him years to continue his reign, or will William and Kate find themselves thrust into leadership sooner than anticipated? Will the reconciliation deepen, or will old resentments resurface under the pressure of public scrutiny and media speculation? No one can answer these questions with certainty. But what we can say is this: for the first time in years, the possibilities feel open rather than foreclosed. The family that seemed irreparably broken has found a path toward healing, imperfect and uncertain though it may be. And at the heart of that healing are 2 women, Camilla, who overcame decades of public hatred to become a force for compassion and reconciliation, and Meghan, who refused to sacrifice her well-being but remained open to connection when offered with genuine respect and understanding. Their unlikely alliance, born from shared experiences of being outsiders within the world's most famous family, may prove to be the thing that saves not just relationships, but the relevance of the crown itself. Because in choosing courage over comfort, honesty over image management, and love over protocol, they've shown that even the most traditional institution can evolve when people insist on being seen and heard as fully human. What do you think? Can the royal family truly move past years of conflict and pain, or is this reconciliation merely temporary? How much should the monarchy evolve to reflect modern values, and how much tradition should it preserve? Share your thoughts in the comments below, and don't forget to like and subscribe for more in-depth coverage of the royal family's ongoing transformation, because this story, like all family stories, is far from over. It's simply entering a new chapter 1 that we'll all be watching with fascination as it unfolds.